I remember that night vividly. It started like any other. I was sitting on the couch, the TV casting a soft blue glow across the living room. A bag of chips rested in my lap as I mindlessly scrolled through channels, trying to distract myself from the swirl of thoughts that had been gnawing at me all day. My apartment felt cozy, nestled on the fourth floor of a quiet building. The height offered a sense of safety, or so I thought. I don't recall hearing anything unusual at first, just the faint hum of the city outside. But then, out of nowhere, there were two deafening bangs on my window, so sudden, so violent, that my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a knock or the casual tap of a bird. It was something much stronger, as if someone or something had slammed against the glass with unrestrained force. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my heartbeat. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but I could see them sway slightly, as if disturbed by the vibrations. My mind raced with questions. Could it be the wind? A prank? But no one could possibly reach my window. Not this high up. Summoning what little courage I had, I put down the bag of chips and crept toward the window. My hands trembled as I pulled the curtain aside. At first, there was nothing. Just the familiar view of the street below, dimly lit by flickering streetlights. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. It was only for a second, but it was unmistakable, a long, thin, black shape slipping through the bars outside my window. It looked like a tail. Not the playful swish of a stray cat, though. This was different, too smooth, too deliberate, and impossibly long. I stood there, staring into the night, hoping for another glimpse to confirm or disprove what I'd just seen. But nothing came. The street below was empty, and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze was the only sound that broke the silence. I wanted to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, maybe my imagination running wild, but something about it didn't feel right. I closed the curtain, my fingers lingering on the fabric, and stepped back. My chest felt tight, my thoughts spiraling. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound outside made me jolt awake, my mind replaying the banging and that strange, fleeting image. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was probably nothing. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted, and it was growing fast. The next night, I tried to shake off the unease lingering from the previous incident. I told myself it was just an overreaction, a fluke occurrence. Determined to move past it, I turned on the TV again, seeking solace in the familiar antics of Tom and Jerry. It was my comfort show, lighthearted and silly, exactly what I needed to distract my mind. Hours passed, and I started to relax, even laughing a little. The noise outside seemed distant, unimportant, as if the world had resumed its normal rhythm. But just as I began to feel at ease, it happened again. This time, it was a single, thunderous bang against the window, sharp, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. My stomach dropped as my body tensed, every instinct telling me to stay put. But curiosity, or maybe foolishness, pushed me to act. I didn't want to, but I had to look. I approached the window cautiously, my bare feet padding silently across the floor. The room felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just the chill of fear settling into my bones. I paused at the edge of the curtain, my hand hovering inches from it, and drew in a deep breath. As I pulled the curtain back, my eyes scanned the scene outside. The street lights cast long shadows across the pavement below, but there was no sign of movement. Nothing, just the same empty, quiet street as always. I stepped closer, pressing my face to the glass for a better look, and that's when I noticed it, a faint, black shape disappearing into the darkness near the edge of my building. It was that tail again, unmistakable and hauntingly smooth as it slithered out of sight. My breath caught in my throat. What was this thing? It couldn't be a cat. The height alone ruled that out. No animal should have been able to reach my window, let alone strike it with such force. And yet, there it was, as real as the air I was breathing. I stepped back from the window, my mind racing. Every explanation I tried to conjure felt hollow, inadequate. My logical side screamed for answers. Was it some kind of prank? A drone? But no matter how much I tried to reason, nothing seemed to fit. That night, I moved to the living room, seeking refuge in another space. I turned the TV on again, the familiar sounds of cartoons filling the air. I needed something to drown out the growing sense of dread. But even there, surrounded by the comfort of my childhood memories, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every creak of the apartment, every gust of wind against the building, it all felt amplified, deliberate, as if the world itself was conspiring against me. I sat there, clutching a blanket, my eyes darting toward the windows every few minutes. It was only when the first light of dawn broke through the horizon that I finally let myself breathe again. The sunlight felt like a shield, a temporary reprieve from whatever had been tormenting me. But I knew deep down that this wasn't over. Something was out there, and it wasn't going to leave me alone. The next couple of days were uneventful, though the uneasy tension lingered. I avoided my room at night, opting to sleep on the couch in the living room. It felt safer somehow, closer to the main door, farther from the window where it had appeared. But peace never lasts, does it? It was late, well past midnight, when I woke up suddenly. My heart was racing, though I couldn't remember what had startled me. The room was dimly lit by the glow of the muted TV, and the apartment was silent, eerily so. Then I heard it, a low, scraping sound. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the remnants of a dream clinging to my consciousness. But it came again, closer this time, more deliberate. The sound was like nails dragging across a hard surface, slow and deliberate, as if it wanted me to notice. I froze, my eyes locked on the hallway that led to my bedroom. The noise was coming from there. I wanted to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But curiosity, or perhaps fear, had a way of taking over. Against my better judgment, I stood and crept toward the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last, my breath shallow and quick. The scraping sound grew louder as I approached the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. My fingers trembled as I pushed it open. At first, the room seemed empty. The faint moonlight streaming through the window illuminated familiar shapes: the desk, the chair, the bed. But then my eyes fell to the window, and my blood ran cold. The shape was back. It was larger now, its form more distinct. What I had thought was a tail before now looked more like a long, sinewy appendage, twisting unnaturally as it moved. It pressed against the bars of the window, curling and uncurling as though testing their strength. And then I saw them, two glowing eyes, faint but unmistakable, staring at me through the glass. They were yellow, almost amber, and they radiated a predatory intensity that made my stomach churn. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed, as the thing pressed its face closer to the window. Its features were obscured by shadows, but I could make out the glint of sharp teeth, far too many for any natural creature. It stared at me, unblinking, as if studying me. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The tail-like appendage slid out of sight, leaving only the faintest scratch marks on the glass. I stumbled back, my chest heaving as I gasped for air. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The rest of the night was a blur. I didn't sleep. I didn't even sit down. I just paced the apartment, checking and rechecking the locks on every door and window. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just some stray animal or prank. It was deliberate, intelligent, and it wanted me to know it was there. By morning, I was a mess, exhausted, paranoid, and filled with a dread that I couldn't shake. But one thing was clear: this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The following night, I didn't dare sleep. I sat on the couch with every light in the apartment on, a kitchen knife clutched tightly in my hand. It was a flimsy defense, but it gave me the illusion of control. The hours dragged, and the apartment was unnervingly quiet. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows, felt like a harbinger of something worse. My phone sat on the coffee table, its screen glowing with unread texts from friends I hadn't spoken to in weeks. A part of me wanted to reach out, to tell someone, anyone, what was happening. But what could I say? Then, just past 2 a.m., it started again. A soft tapping, barely audible at first, like fingernails lightly drumming against glass. It came from my bedroom window. I froze, my grip on the knife tightening. My breathing grew shallow, and my heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. I wanted to ignore it, to convince myself it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew better. The sound stopped abruptly, replaced by something far worse, a low, guttural growl that seemed to resonate through the walls. It wasn't natural, not like any animal I had ever heard. It was deep and wet, as though it came from a throat too large and too misshapen to belong to anything from this world. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I crept toward the bedroom. My legs felt like lead, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The growling had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I leaned in, pressing my ear against the wood, straining to hear anything. And then it happened, a loud bang, like something had slammed against the window with enough force to rattle the glass. I stumbled back, my pulse skyrocketing. I burst into the room, knife raised, but what I saw made me drop it. The window was open, wide open. The bars that had once been a secure barrier now lay bent and broken on the floor. The cold night air rushed in, carrying with it a strange metallic scent. And on the wall, just above the window, was a mark. It wasn't a scratch or a crack, but something carved into the plaster. It was jagged, almost runic, and it glowed faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. The symbol seemed to draw me in, its faint light flickering and shifting as though alive. Then I heard it, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving across the floor above me. My heart sank. I lived on the top floor. I backed out of the room, my mind racing. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and I realized they weren't coming from above anymore. They were in the hallway. I turned and ran, grabbing my phone as I bolted toward the front door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, the heavy thuds of those footsteps closing in behind me. When I finally flung the door open, the hallway beyond was empty. I didn't stop to think. I didn't stop to breathe. I just ran, down the stairs, out of the building, and into the freezing night air. The street was deserted, the silence oppressive. I turned back, staring up at my apartment window, and there it was. A shadowy figure stood in the open window, its form obscured, but its glowing eyes unmistakable. It watched me, motionless, as if daring me to come back. I didn't go back to the apartment that night. Instead, I stayed at a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asked questions. The room was small and smelled of mildew, but it felt safer than my home. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the walls, every groan of the old pipes, set my nerves on edge. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. What was that thing? Why was it haunting me? And most importantly, how could I stop it? As dawn broke, I decided I couldn't run forever. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to leave me alone. If I wanted to end it, I had to face it. I spent the day preparing, though I wasn't sure for what. I bought salt and lined my pockets with it, remembering something vague about it being protective. I stopped at a hardware store and picked up a heavy-duty flashlight and a crowbar. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. When night fell, I made my way back to the apartment. The building loomed before me, dark and silent, its windows like empty eyes. My stomach churned as I stepped inside, the faint scent of metal still lingering in the air. The hallway stretched before me, unnaturally long and dim. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me. each step echoing like a gunshot. When I reached my apartment door, it was ajar. The sight sent a chill down my spine. I pushed it open cautiously, the creak of the hinges making me wince. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for the bedroom door, which now stood wide open. The symbol above the window was gone, but the air felt heavy, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I gripped a crowbar tightly as I stepped into the room. My flashlight beam swept over the walls, the floor, the bed. Nothing. Then I heard it, a low, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate through the room. It wasn't growling this time, but something worse. A guttural clicking that sent shivers down my spine. The closet door creaked open. I turned, my flashlight trembling in my hand. It stood there, partially obscured by shadow, its elongated form barely fitting within the confines of the closet. Its eyes glowed faintly, twin orbs of pale light that seemed to pierce through me. Its body was grotesque, an unnatural fusion of angular limbs and smooth, featureless flesh. The thing's head tilted as if studying me, its movements slow and deliberate, almost mocking. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I stood my ground. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice shaking. It didn't respond. Instead, it stepped forward, the floor creaking beneath its weight. I threw the salt. The grain scattered through the air, catching the faint glow of the creature's eyes. For a moment, it recoiled, a guttural hiss escaping its form as it shrank back into the shadows. But it didn't leave. Instead, the air grew colder, and the shadows around it seemed to ripple and shift. The thing lunged, faster than I could react, its clawed hand striking the crowbar from my grip. I stumbled back, crashing into the wall as it loomed over me. In a last desperate act, I swung the flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness and hitting the thing square in the eyes. It let out a deafening screech, the sound reverberating through my skull. The light seemed to hurt it, the glow of its eyes flickering like dying embers. Seizing the moment, I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back as I bolted from the room, down the hallway, and out of the building. When I reached the street, the night was eerily quiet. I turned back to the building, half expecting to see it watching me from the window. But there was nothing. I never went back to the apartment after that night. I don't know what that thing was, or why it chose me. All I know is that it's still out there, somewhere in the dark, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is silent, I can still hear that clicking sound.